Ellie, did you want to take the intro or do you want me to just kick it?
If you want to kick it,
All right, sounds good. All right, friends, we are going to be talking about teaming, data, and screening all rolled into one today. So it's a topic that definitely, or topics that, I mean, we're gonna kind of surface level touch on each of these, but certainly with a trauma informed lens. Know that some of these topics are a little more general, like teaming today is gonna be a topic that cuts across multiple systems. That's on purpose. We want to integrate our systems. When we talk about data, we're going to be talking about data writ large. So lots of different systems of data, lots of different data sets, certainly inclusive of data relative to trauma. Hey, Karen. And then we're going to talk about screening. And you really can't get to trauma screening, in my opinion, if you don't start with screening for perhaps a topic that's a little less jarring for your population. So all of this is in the interest of a trauma responsive, trauma informed system, but knowing that there are, I guess these are somewhat foundational elements of a larger system. They lead to trauma informed, trauma responsive systems, but we kind of have to start with the general, which is strong teaming, good strong data sets, data systems, and the opportunity to screen. So like I said to all of you a few minutes ago, like, please, like, chime in. This is not a day for me to talk at you. Ask lots of questions, pop some info in the chat, and this hour and a half will go by real quick. This is part of a larger series. I think some of you know that, maybe all of you, but Thriving Minds is this wonderful collaboration between Bright, the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium, and the Rennie Center. And we got some friends in the room. Ellie Sanchez, Laura Dzorny, if you want to wave hello. They are joining us from the Rennie Center. Laura's waving virtually. I love it. And we do not have our friends from Bright here today. That's okay. They're always in the mix, and they'll join us next time. We want to thank the Center on Child Wellbeing and Trauma for funding this opportunity and for being able to support our professional development series here today. And like I said, thanks. Here we go. So to start off, Jane, welcome. We just started up. We're going to be hitting some of the topics relative to a school mental health framework and some of the infrastructure associated with that framework. So we'll get into a very, I think it's important to kind of start with the goal or start with the end in mind. Like, this is the goal of implementation, a comprehensive school mental health system. One of the things that's going to get a little bit tricky today is we're going to talk about interconnected systems framework. We're going to talk about the idea that a comprehensive school mental health system actually already is an ISF. And then we're going to talk about the fact that the language in the field is pretty muddied, and it doesn't lend itself to just straight up definition. We'll get through it together, and we'll end with an understanding that it's about the practices, it's about the alignment of systems, it's about understanding the components of each MTSS that are held in common across different flavors of MTSS. And that will make more sense as we keep going. But I guess I'd love to ask all of you, when you read this definition of a comprehensive school mental health system, something that has a full array of tiered mental health services, something for everybody at tier 1, for all, by all, I think social emotional learning, mental health literacy, universal mental health screening. When you think of collaborative partnerships with community-based mental health agencies and other community agencies, when you think about evidence-based services and supports as being a part of this much larger system, who here feels like they are getting to this? You don't have to be at 100%, but you're getting there. Colleen says yes. Cool. Colleen, Jane, love it. Colleen, answer me this. What aspect of a comprehensive school mental health system do you feel like you're working toward right now and feeling good about it?
Well, I feel like our full array of tiered mental health services is really good, but we've done a lot of work over the past few years in, I have to shout out to Karen McCrillis and our student pupil personnel, the counseling director, for really beefing up the staff in the district too, so that we have good representation of SACs, school psychs, BCBAs that are building based, so that we can really provide very specific tiered mental health interventions and services for kids at all levels.
Cool, love it. Really good. I'm also hearing staff utilization in there, teaming, good stuff. Jane, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What do you got going on?
Similar, we have extra staff in our schools, and I feel that the outside partnerships are building as well. And I know our counselors are in contact with them weekly, if not daily.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Anyone else care to share a component? Adriana?
Yes, we actually were able not only to provide now counseling in multiple languages. We've been using Language Line. Language Line offers up to 240 different languages. So our counselors are able to provide sessions now with kids who don't speak English in our district. And also we just won a competitive grant, and we are able now to provide clinicians for all after school programs in partnership with the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club of Woburn. So
That's
we're very
wonderful.
excited about that.
Well done. That sounds fantastic. And Language Line, I haven't heard of that. I'm thrilled to hear about that. If you don't mind, Adriana, if you could pop in the chat the link to that resource, that'd be wonderful.
Yep, I don't mind. We'll do that right now. And you guys also feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Language Line has a contract with also the state, so you can get a discounted rate. And we did, we investigate several companies before we went with Language Line. We highly recommend.
Love that. Adriana receives no kickback from Language Line, I can assure you. No money. Okay, so I love to hear that we've got different stuff going on. I don't mind calling out Craig. He's got some great work happening around universal mental health screening, which is excellent. All of these are components of a larger comprehensive school mental health system. So let's just bear that in mind. It's no one thing. It's a lot of components working together to build this system. So let's get into the part of this that's going to be a little confusing, but we'll get there. So this intersection of PBIS, school mental health, and interconnected systems framework. I'm going to read this to you. I normally don't read straight off the slide, but I feel like this definition is an important one. ISF is the integration of PBIS and school mental health. That's one example of a comprehensive school mental health system. In addition to using PBIS and/or ISF tools, many schools and districts also use SHAPE, which you know about. We've talked about the SHAPE system, to assess and improve their CSMHS. If a system is already using PBIS or ISF tools, it may feel redundant to do the whole quality assessment in SHAPE, but some of the modules and resources on SHAPE would likely be very helpful. So, like, what are we talking about here? We're basically saying that CSMHS, this comprehensive school mental health system thing, it's already an ISF, but you can get to ISF by maybe already having PBIS and building out tier 2, tier 3 supports that are focused on SMH. It's just a lot of acronyms, friends. Like, let's look at interconnected systems frameworks as something like this. We are going to combine our tiered systems of support, leverage those common components, and recognize that there are different services being offered that leverage integrated data systems, teaming, needs assessment, and resource mapping. A little bit complicated, but we're going to get there. Let's keep going. I asked this question and I look to you. Does integration and alignment have to stop at school mental health and PBIS? No problem, Craig.
Sorry, can you just explain again what SHAPE is? I think I missed the last session and maybe I missed that.
Yeah, for sure. SHAPE system is a web-based tool to really measure the health of your mental health system, the degree to which you're adopting the national performance measures for comprehensive school mental health. So there's a quality assessment in there with 7 different domains. I think that's right. And those domains are things like teaming and screening and evidence-based services across all tiers. And you're really looking to find the gaps in your implementation. Oh, thank you, Ellie. Ellie just dropped the
Thank
link
you.
in the chat. Look for the gaps in your implementation. Also look for the pieces of implementation that are going really well that you can capitalize on. So it is a form of needs assessment and resource mapping for your comprehensive school mental health system. So to the question, are the only 2 things you can combine school mental health and PBIS? What do you think? Are there other flavors of MTSS that you might want to weave in there? I'm seeing Leslie nod. Colleen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like we have like equity initiatives, we have parent family engagement committees, there's academic MTSS. There should be some like interwovenness of all of these things.
There
Mhm.
you go. There you go. Yeah, all the things, right? This is actually a Methuen's approach to interconnected systems frameworks. This is a team I run in Methuen called the Comprehensive Student Support Team, and we're feeling like all of these supports funnel to this single team, and that allows for us to operate from a place of efficiency and really comprehensive supports for kids. Yes.
Can you
I
say
know-
more about, sorry, can you say more about
Yeah.
what do you mean by all of these things funnel to? Do you mean that
So-
the personnel on the CSST are leading initiatives in these areas?
That's correct, Jamie. Yeah.
Okay,
So I mean, I've run like a 6-hour series just on CSST. So I'm going to be like abbreviating this in a big way, but this is how I would explain it. CSST is a district-wide team that's focused on initiatives and planning for all of these types of supports. Members of the district team are also members of the building-based teams that work on implementation, coaching, planning at the building level. So you've got some executive team operations that are happening, kind of large scale planning for the district, alignment, decision-making, leading into implementation, piloting, coaching, and on the ground work from those same team members that are representatives of the district-wide team. We can have conversations in the same room about things like social emotional learning and PBIS, because why shouldn't we? So these things, there's alignment there. These data systems should be integrated. These teams are more efficient and effective if they're together. How many of you here who run teams or who are perhaps part of multiple teams notice the same people in the room on all the teams? Yeah, but instead of scheduling, 1 meeting, we schedule 26 meetings, and then we worry about, or we're confused when people are burnt out. This is no word of a lie. In Methuen, I used to run 5 SEL teams, 1 for each building, 5 PBIS teams, 1 for each building, the Mental Health Initiative Committee, the Safe and Supportive Schools team, and then I was a member of the UDL team. So I ran 12 separate meetings on a biweekly basis. That is not sustainable. It's just not. I was having the same conversation at every one of those meetings and then scrambling to try and tell people what happened at this meeting compared to that one.
what was your role running all those different meetings?
Director of School Mental Health and Behavioral Services.
Got it, thanks.
I think, I mean, it's just not a sustainable thing. What about having 1 meeting, saving on 11 hours of time and being more efficient, effective, and integrated? That was the goal. We've run this for a while now. It works. It's really, really effective. So as we start to talk about teaming relative to trauma responsive practices, know that I'm not asking you to stand up a new team. Please integrate this team into the work that you're already doing. It's going to be way more effective. So this is the important message that I want to share. These are the common features between multi-tiered systems of support. When you think of PBIS, yep, you need teaming, you need a data system, you've got some services happening, and we need to understand the needs of our kids and our systems and the fidelity of our implementation. Okay, well, same exact thing going on in a comprehensive school mental health system. You got to make sure that you have a team and a data system, and yeah, right. Like, so when we look for the common features across these tiered systems of support, that's right there. That's where you capitalize on integration. Now, I want to be open and honest. Sure, tiers 2 and 3 in a comprehensive school mental health system probably look different compared to a behavioral tiered system that includes PBIS and maybe collaborative problem solving and restorative practices. That being said, they're leveraging the same data systems, the same team where they can, the same needs assessment resource mapping procedures. Does that make some sense? Thumbs up, you with me? Okay, let's keep moving. This is another way of looking at that. On the left, you're going to see the national quality assessment domains. So this is these are the domains in the SHAPE system that we talked about in the quality assessment. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see what they use in the land of PBIS an awful lot, the tiered fidelity inventory. So team composition, team operating procedures, yeah, we cover that in the school mental health quality assessment. Those are common features. What about the stuff in pink? I see those as really interventions. Yeah, we have that going on in the quality assessment. What about data? Yep, that's accounted for in this system too. So, you know, the message here is that it's definitely the case that you see this crosswalk happening between systems. It allows for you to be more efficient. You can conduct needs assessment and resource mapping for behavioral tiered support and school mental health and SEL tiered systems of support separately. You can do that. It's twice as hard and takes twice as long. You could have 2 teams managing that work, which takes twice as much time and twice as much energy. I mean, it is doable, but when you start to have all of these supports in place, and then you add to it the trauma-informed, trauma-responsive slice and pie, yeah, it's going to get overwhelming. So let's recognize that from a trauma-responsive standpoint, there's teaming, data, needs assessment, resource mapping, and intervention that can be woven into an existing system. Fair? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. Did I show you this before? I think I have. Maybe. If I haven't, I'm going to give you a ridiculous analogy that you're going to laugh at and share with friends over April break. It's going to be the best time. When we look at these interconnected systems, we've got all kinds of interventions happening in them. We've got right here, I'm going to call this our comprehensive school mental health system. I'm going to call this our academic tiered system of support. I'm going to call this our behavior tiered system of support. And yeah, you've got tier 1 stuff happening, tier 2 stuff happening that isn't exactly the same, and tier 3 stuff that's not exactly the same. But down here, this is really important. There are no splits between the tiered systems of support at tier 1. Who can tell me why? Anybody want to take a crack at this?
Because they're good for everyone.
They are good for everyone. Absolutely. What else? Anything? Let's use a ridiculous example to get there. Posting the daily agenda. You good with that? That's a practice that we all would say, yeah, posting the daily agenda is good. It's a good academic practice. But when we post the daily agenda, we're actually providing students with a little bit of knowledge about how they're going to select to engage. You're giving them choice on how they're going to engage when they already know what's going to happen later. So that's a UDL practice. And you're also pre-correcting off-task behavior, which is PBIS. Those behavioral expectations are explicitly stated in that agenda in terms of what constitutes on-task behavior. Okay, so you're checking off UDL and PBIS so far. Well, you're also alerting students to transitions that are going to happen in the lesson, and that's a trauma-sensitive practice. So posting the daily agenda fits in this piece of the MTSS triangle and happens to be a practice that is all the things. It's cross-cutting, and that's the point. These systems have practices at tier 1 that really don't sit pretty in any one MTSS. It's about the practices, not the acronyms, at tier 1 especially. I don't expect like the chemistry teacher at the high school to wax poetic over where this practice lives. Let's not worry about that. Buy into the ethos of the systems. For PBIS, I'd say something like, it's important to explicitly teach behavioral expectations and to support students by reinforcing those instances in which they meet those expectations. That's a good thing. Buy into that, and and then do these practices. So teach the ethos of the system, give teachers the practices. I think it's important for people who are in systems level positions to be able to distinguish and see the nuance and make sure that we're covering all of the systems. But honestly, like, let's lower the temperature in terms of acronym overload and initiative overload for our implementers, and just talk about the practices and not worry so much about, like, can you imagine going into a teacher's room, and some of you have probably done this, and you're like, so are you doing the PBIS thing? And how's the trauma sensitive thing going? What about UDL? Are you PBIS-ing it today? Like, it's too much for them to manage in terms of mental overload. Because at the end of the day, the one practice that they might be killing it with is cutting across all the systems of support. And they need a little bit of encouragement there. How we doing? Is this making sense? Resonating? Cool. Look, we've got a couple new friends coming. So wonderful. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the integration of practices. We've talked about the cross-cutting themes for ISF. So those places where you can capitalize on efficiency and integration. Welcome, Grace. So I want to talk about these different pieces of infrastructure that leads into our discussion about teaming. We got to talk about partnerships, mental health partnerships, after school stuff, community-based agencies that can maybe support those problems relative to like social influencers of health and education, food insecurity, housing insecurity, stuff like that. We want to talk about the people that populate these teams, support staff, school leaders, again, our partners. The various different teams that are associated with our tiered systems of support. And again, I'm going to push you to think about integrated teams. And then data, all kinds of different data. Sometimes that's going to be academic, attendance, behavior, mental health. We're going to run through a few scenarios as well that will help you to understand the importance of data integration and what happens when you don't look at the complete data set and maybe just look at one piece of data. There are inherent implications of operating from one data set, not considering the complete data set. So we'll get into that. Let's start with partnerships. And this was from a slide deck that my buddy Paul and Courtney from the Bright program were using for Cuyahoga County. So we're gonna just skip over the fact that it says Cuyahoga County because that doesn't exist in Massachusetts. But community partnerships are essential to school-based mental health systems in Massachusetts. We're often looking for a certain set of things in schools. We need consultation and collaboration with our in-house staff. You don't want this mental health person to come into the building and operate in a silo or a vacuum and never talk to the existing staff. That doesn't work really well. Is there anyone here who's seen that like play out? Quick show of hands. Colleen, yeah. Outside person coming in, they provide their service, they walk away. We don't know what happened even. It's unfortunate sometimes. We do want them to use evidence-based practices. I am unfortunately privy to some situations where, not currently, but in the past, we've had outside clinicians come in and it's been a lot of not evidence-based practice. How about that? It's been an unfortunate situation in which our kids are not getting what they need. So we have to be upfront with people and say, like, yeah, we want to partner with you, but we also want you to use evidence-based therapeutic modalities. Like, what do you use? And if they're like, I use checkers therapy. I don't know, friends. I think we can do better. We also want them to share data to aid in progress monitoring and documenting the impact of our larger system. Think about the number of students served. Think about progress monitoring data. Think about show rate for services. All of that matters. What can we typically offer our partners? Well, time, space, and referrals. Most of the time, and I'm going to say most of the time because coming off the heels of the pandemic, community-based mental health is in a different place. They're overwhelmed. It's also the case that partnering with schools was very difficult during the pandemic. And we have 2 to 3 times greater need going on. So I'm going to say during not a pandemic, it is the case that time, space, and referrals is something that a community-based mental health agency would jump on. You're telling me I can come into your school during the day? You're going to give me an office and a bunch of kids to work with? Great, definitely. Where's the MOU? We'll sign up. Now I know it doesn't, we got to move back toward that time. I hope that happens again. But typically, this is what we can offer, and this is what we should expect of our community partners. Anyone have anything else to say about this piece? We got all kinds of people joining now. Welcome, Christine. Christine, we haven't even started the presentation. We're waiting for you. So we're gonna start up now, everyone.
Sorry, trying to get through the ways of.
I get it. I totally get it. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Okay. So, I mean, at the end of the day, these partnerships can be wonderful and they can lead to some really great outcomes. I think we have common goals when we think about these partnerships. We want to increase mental health services and staff for kids. That's it. Follow through for referrals increases when we have services happening in the building. We get increased show rates for our sessions. We saw a massive uptick in show rates for summer services when we had our community-based mental health folks co-locate in our schools. We did literally nothing else. We just said, the service that you typically get is going to happen in the school over the summer. And the show rate jumped up. Why? Well, kids are familiar with the school. They maybe figured out transportation for the school already. They probably live in close proximity to the school. It just works. Collaborative case management for sure is a win when we are talking about our partnerships. We get to align our services with the services that the outside person is providing. At least that's how it should look. I tell my people, it's not about replacing your services. It's about augmenting what you're doing with this person. Adriana, you have counseling sessions and support on CDO sites and after-school programs. Love that. Yeah, it's so good. And yeah, increase services during school breaks and over the summer. Adriana already got into it in terms of the question in the chat. Additional goals you think should be considered for partnerships related to school mental health. What are some things you'd like to see when you partner with a community-based agency? What do we think? Adriana had a really good one. Let's boost that after-school program efficacy. You can come off mute too. Welcome that.
I think now that we are kind of starting to get back into the groove of COVID situation and doing more things in person, I feel that now during the summer will be a good time to get young people together somehow, either in a youth center, in a YMCA somewhere, and just get to talk to them how they're feeling now that we're starting, and that's just to have them begin a new year next year, school year, different.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it would be a nice partnership or a nice like collaborative partnership conversation with kids, with families, and with our community-based agencies. That'd be great. Good call, Leslie. Anybody else? Something you'd appreciate from your community partners? As you're thinking, I'll offer one more. Have you ever thought about maybe asking your community-based partners to provide clinical supervision to your people? Why not? They're coming in anyway. They're making bank. Let's be honest. You're giving them a bunch of referrals. You can ask for stuff in return. Yes, you can come in and partner with us. We'll give you a bunch of referrals. What I want in exchange is some supervision hours for my people. Thank you. They're not going to say no. So Faye Brady offers family support, engagement, and partnership would be an important goal. Yeah, I love that. That, you know, it makes me think of like IHT services, you know, the ability for us to check on that and to be able to maybe leverage that a little more effectively, assessing the needs of families in a more effective way. Cool. Love it. Okay, let's keep going. These are some questions that I guess like I would want to make sure that we're asking. Welcome, Kim. When we're talking about evaluating our partnerships with community agencies, is the partnership governed by a clear MOU? Super important. What do you want from the partnership? What did they want? And do we have an agreement there? Have an out, friends. If there is not an agreed upon, I guess, operational set of principles, then you can't really break the relationship or hold people accountable and say, you're not doing the thing we asked you to do, because if you don't set expectations, then they can't meet them. Does the MOU or agreement include sharing of service utilization and outcome data? If you're not explicit in your ask about data, then they might get real nervous when you start asking for it at the end of the year. Also, why are you asking for it at the end of the year? Ask for it throughout the year. You want to check on that service, make sure it's working well. Are partner staff fully integrated into the life and culture of the school? We talked about this briefly. You don't want a situation where you've got a staff member from an outside agency coming in, working in a silo, never talking to anyone, providing a service and walking away. It should be a collaborative partnership. What about this? Do school staff know what they can and can't ask of partner staff? Like, does the assistant principal know that they can't ask the outside clinician to cover lunch duty? Probably important for them to know that. Where there are multiple mental health partners involved, are roles and relationships clear to all? The classic example of two mental health partners coming in and fighting over the one office. We have to delineate roles and responsibilities and time and collaborate. And do partners represent the interest and makeup of the community? We have a wonderful agency that we work with, and they provide culturally and linguistically appropriate services for our kids. It has been wonderful to be able to say, listen, we do not have a lot of clinicians that are bilingual. All of your clinicians are bilingual. Please come in, like we would love for you to be able to provide services to our kids. Are there other questions that you think should be on here? Stuff that you ask of maybe some of your partners?
I would ask of their ability to meet often. We meet with our partners once a week. We've been meeting since maybe for over a year now. And I think that's really helpful for the relationship and also keeping, you know, the same culture of services and our values aligned. So I think it's important to meet with them often.
I love that. It's fantastic. So meeting often is a value that you hold. Very cool. Kim.
We had asked about interviewing clinicians before making the commitment to have them come in, and also to make sure that they were fully licensed and not, you know, an intern who was then being supervised by somebody at the agency.
Very cool. Love that. Quality control. Okay. This is good stuff. I'm gonna keep us moving because I've got like 60 more slides. There we go. When we talk about, we've talked about partnerships, we also want to talk about the people that we're working with, right? The people in our specific roles. I think I've had some conversations with some staff in districts here and there throughout this year, other years, where, you know, we talk about this, the sphere of influence that they have over maybe their staffing model or the roles that are making up their team. And there's always this like, I wish I could, you know, I wish I could take care, like I wish I could change the whole system overnight. And for like a random school counselor or school adjustment counselor working within a much larger system, I recognize that, like, if your philosophy is that I should be doing work this way and I wish I could be influencing change in that way, it could be, I could see the frustration. I could understand where maybe you've got a vision that can't be enacted with everybody. You can't change other people's behavior. But I think, you know, I often think about, and I've shared this, like, what can you do with your practice tomorrow that would enact change? That is within your sphere of influence, within your locus of control. And I often use this example of, like, let's pretend Megan has not done measurement-based care ever. Megan just doesn't measure student outcomes. And, you know, tomorrow, could that change? Could she start to use psychosocial tools to measure student progress relative to her services that she provides? Yeah, she could. That's within her license and within her role, and a decision that could be made. Now, I would go light. I would seek a little bit of guidance from supervision from the supervisor, but I think that, you know, that's a simple practice that could be implemented, albeit maybe on a slow roll basis, that could be within the sphere of control, the locus of control, and move practice at least within what, you know, you can change. So I know that sometimes working within a district or a school where the change is not happening fast enough, yeah, that can be frustrating. But what can you change about your practice? That's what I would ask you to maybe consider. Okay, when we talk about guiding questions for the people that we work with, I got to call out the diversity of staffing models that exist across schools and districts. It makes it real difficult to compare staffing models because, my God, they're all different. I mean, I've seen staffing model. I've seen hundreds of different staffing models with nameless staffing models. I can't even call them anything because they're seemingly just patched together. In Methuen, we use a comprehensive staffing model. I designed this so that we are leveraging all of our people in a similar fashion. If you work in Methuen, I don't care what license you have, you can work in our comprehensive school mental health system. You could be a school counselor, an adjustment counselor, social worker, you could be a school psych. You're all welcome to work within the comprehensive school mental health system, and you are all going to be assigned a caseload and service kids across all domains of need and all tiers of support. Why? Because we've crosswalked all these training programs, and friends, they're pretty much the same. Now, there are nuances and differences in some ways. If you are a school psychologist, yes, you have done some additional training to be able to engage in special education eligibility testing. However, you also have excellent training to be able to provide services and supports to kids on the caseload. So it's not that I'm going to turn a blind eye to your school psychologist license. It's that we're going to welcome you on board, and your project is going to be testing. Just like the project for a social worker who perhaps has some additional training around navigating the community mental health space is going to be just that. Your project is going to be setting up relationships with these community-based providers. School counselor, you likely have some additional training around academic planning and advising and post-secondary planning. Love it. That's your project. So it's project-based. So it's specialized projects based on license, but the core of what everyone does is the same. Now I can call out that comprehensive staffing model and explain it to people, but what I'm guessing is that there's not a lot of reflection on current staffing models that exist within a lot of districts. It's a staffing model that has perhaps persisted for many, many years, has gone unchecked. And when asked like, well, why do you do it that way? It's typically, well, that's how we've always done it. And that can be really scary because that doesn't allow for us to make movement forward and ensure that we're being efficient, effective. Does that resonate with any of you? This idea that maybe the staffing model has gone unchecked for quite some time, that maybe we haven't unpacked how we're utilizing staff for a little bit. Anybody? It's a safe space. Okay. You are all killing it when it comes to staffing models. Kate, thank you for being honest. If that's one of you, and I recognize there are teams in the room and you're like, don't ask, oh my God. But if you haven't checked your staffing model, if you haven't checked how you're utilizing roles, it's definitely worth the time and energy. You could and probably are under leveraging your staff. We're going to have a session coming up through Thriving Minds about leveraging all school-based mental health staff for to provide mental health services. We're going to run it yesterday, had a family emergency. I apologize. We're going to run it coming up. We'll reschedule. But these questions are essential to getting to a staffing model and role assignment in a way that's going to be really efficient, effective. Does your school or district have a written formal plan for how school support staff and mental health partner staff are assigned? Give me a quick thumbs up if that's you. You've got that going on. No? Okay, food for thought. What about this? Are roles and responsibilities clear for supports at all tiers for both SEL and mental health? Jane's nodding, good. I'm seeing a lot of heads shake though. All right, again, food for thought. I'm asking this not to call anyone out. These are just important things we gotta ask. It's for our kids at the end of the day. If we don't ask these things, we might be operating from a really inefficient standpoint. How could you go about filling in gaps and addressing redundancies? That's where resource mapping and needs assessment come in handy. This is a big one, and I'm going to share some really like fresh off the press data with you. Who here has a clinical leadership structure in your school or district that allows for clinical supervision and a seat at the table when you are making decisions about the support structures that are in place in your district? Yes or no in the chat? Full audience participation, please. I'm saying no. Kim's a yes, no. Somewhat. No and yes, says Colleen, which is a zero-sum game. No, no. Also somewhat, a little. All right. We are waffling a lot on this question, friends. Here we go. I just sent out a survey to hundreds of districts in Massachusetts. We got some great response from over 100 districts that participated in this survey. The question was, do you currently employ an administrator who provides clinical supervision and clinical leadership relative to the student services provided in the district? Who wants to guess at the percentage of districts that said, yes, we do? 5%? 10%? 10%? Pretty dire. 15%? Okay. So the number of districts that said, we do have something going on, it's a little higher than what you were guessing at, about 31%, which means that 2 out of 3 districts are saying no. Clinical leadership, clinical supervision, nope. What do you think about that? Come off mute, Chair, please.
Clinical supervision is just such an important part in growing your professional practice and getting feedback on your skills, and it's ethical for us to collaborate from them. So it's a gap. We also have people who get hired out of their master's programs who need the opportunity to pursue the rest of their licensure. And so it's part of their professional development to have that clinical supervision.
Colleen's killing it. Love it. In the absence, oh, go ahead, Kate.
I'm a LICSW, and I think I've been in the school system, different districts for 6 years. And I think one of the challenges as well is understanding the scope of our work and understanding what we can bring to the school system as well. So I think that is a challenge that and again, I'm new, so I don't know if that's just my experience, but I think that there's a big challenge in understanding the scope of services that we can provide, and then the importance of that clinical piece to make those services even better and to hit all 3 tiers. Because I think oftentimes even teachers don't really know what exactly is the school adjustment counselor's job, what is the social worker's job. So I think that's something that we've run into, that clarity around that would be very helpful.
I love that, Kate. I really appreciate you chiming in.
John, I did put in the chat. So we recognized as a district this sort of gap in support, particularly the clinical support for our social workers. We currently have them overseen by our director of guidance, which is not, it's a stopgap. It's not ideal. So we are actually looking to hire somebody to sort of be that support and oversee the social emotional piece, oversee nurses and social workers, and also the curriculum piece with the health. But I agree with Kate, who is new to our district, that we don't have that sort of big picture for all of our social workers and our principals, so that everybody understands their role and their capacity.
Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. That's really helpful. I worry what happens in the absence of clinical leadership and supervision. I worry about things like the PD plan that doesn't exist for mental health staff. I worry about the lack of feedback and coaching. I worry about that there's no seat at the table when there are decisions being made about funding, about hiring, about building systems of support, selecting interventions. Like it runs the gamut. The whole system deserves leadership. The whole system deserves an appropriate supervisor. There are a lot of very well-meaning, and I want to hand it to them and applaud their efforts. a lot of well-meaning associate principals out there that are being asked to supervise and evaluate mental health staff. Friends, I would be a pretty terrible supervisor of chemistry or math. I think I've got the clinical supervision chops to do a great job, but we're asking people to operate outside of their expertise. Pedagogy and therapeutic practice are different things, and we should honor that and give people the right kind of feedback and leadership and supervision. Because when we don't, they don't get better at their practice. And reversion to default theory, which I have coined, is this idea that you get a great master's program, you're a clinically trained individual who might get a terrible practicum and start the process of unlearning, and then get dropped into a district with no clinical leadership and no good PD plan and no systems such that it continues your process of unlearning. And then we're so confused why people tend to still operate as though we're guidance counselors from the 70s. We just have to be honest about the systems that we didn't build or foster that have led us to this point. Does this make sense? Seeing all kinds of heads nod. I love it. So you remember when I published reversion to default theory, remember where you heard it first. It's good stuff. All right, I'm way behind. We gotta keep moving. Nope. All right, school mental health team. Group of school and community stakeholders that meet regularly and use database decision-making to support student mental health. This is how the NCSMH teaming playbook. It's a good resource. Check it out. We want to talk about the functions of a quality school mental health team, but I also want to point you back to that discussion about ISF. So when I say school mental health team, I want you to remember that in some instances, we want to make sure that we are collapsing these teams together for efficiency and integration. District-wide needs assessment, that's our comprehensive student support team. School-based needs assessment, how's it going on the ground? Resource mapping, district-wide, resource mapping in the building. These things flow together. Implementation, oversight from the district team, and straight up implementation from the building-based teams who report back to allow for that monitoring and assessment to happen. I think this makes sense, but it doesn't make sense when you've got 38 teams that don't talk to each other and no executive leadership team. Just doesn't happen. It should be a multidisciplinary team. We want to streamline teams. That's that integration piece. Productive meeting structure. Friends, no one comes to the table with an agenda. It's absurd. But just write down 3 things on a napkin at least. Like that would help. It'd be wonderful. How about data sharing among team members? That would be great. But oftentimes we silo our data and you've got 2 people that are the keepers of the key. They're the only ones that can access those data. And then we want well-established working relationships among staff and partners so that we can facilitate the referrals to supports outside of that service array that's in the school.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Backing up, so the mental health team, multidisciplinary, who are you thinking are those different disciplines on the mental health team?
Yeah, so I'm going to use our early example as like when we had a mental health initiative committee. So we had not integrated at that point. We had mental health staff from every building. So think school counselor, school psych from every building. We also had an administrator from every building. And at that time, it was either a dean or an associate principal. I served on the team as the central office leadership. But we also had kids and families who were part of like a subcommittee of that team, the Mental Health Parent Student Advisory Council. And I could definitely see, you definitely want teachers on the team too. When we're talking about tier 1 work that's going to be happening or screening, like the experience of screening for a teacher, what does that look like? So I see room at the table for a lot of different roles. We just want to make sure our perspectives are covered.
Mhm.
I hear these common challenges: meetings aren't frequent enough, inconsistent participation, wrong people at the table, roles and responsibilities are undefined. I love this one. We admire the problem. We wax poetic over the problem. We talk about how difficult it is. Who here, and this is not a trick question, cares about mental health? Raise your hand. Oh, that's weird. Okay. Caring about mental health and doing something about mental health in your schools, that's two different things, right? We can admire the problem, or we can wax poetic over how much we care about mental health. But unless we actually do something, then that theory to action piece doesn't happen. And that's a problem. So that's the piece we need to work on the most, is that meeting should be action oriented. It should not be the case that we are simply talking about the problem. It's okay to talk about the problem during the needs assessment phase of the meeting or meetings, but once you get into action planning and implementation, you gotta move. You gotta do the work. Okay. Nope. Data integration. We gotta talk about this. There's all kinds of, I guess, levels of data. When we bring our data systems together, we're able to do comprehensive initial assessment. So think of mental health data sitting next to behavioral data, sitting next to attendance data. That's a much richer set of data, such that you can understand student needs in a more comprehensive fashion. It also helps with functional analysis. It also helps with understanding the impact of integrated services on proximal outcomes. I bet that if we provide mental health services to a kid and it is an effective mental health service, you're going to see an increase in attendance and a decrease in behavior and an increase in academic functioning. We have to recognize that proximal outcomes are also part and parcel of good progress monitoring. And aggregate data, when we bring all these things together and we have group level data, systems level data, then we can do things like program evaluation, system evaluation, which we can check for fidelity. And we can see the impact of integrated systems and practices on proximal outcomes. Like when we integrate or when we implement SEL effectively, we know from research that there is an 11 percentile increase in score or in academic scores. We know that. So this is already proven, but we should measure it. I am going to skip over this stuff. I'm sorry, because we're way behind, but here we go. Let's consider the following. Is it reasonable to assume that an improvement in psychosocial functioning could have an impact on academic achievement? Does that make sense? What do you think? Seeing some heads nod. I think that's a fair assessment. I don't know that we often take the logical leap and actually measure that, though. I often see, like, we measure like one thing at a time relative to our services. We never look at multiple data sets, and that's going to allow for us to get to these proximal outcomes. How about this? If behavioral referrals decrease, could that be because of an increase in service delivery for mental health concerns? Fair? Maybe? Is behavior sometimes a function of social emotional need? Yes, right? So fair to say that that could be true. If attendance increases, could that be a function of improvements in psychosocial functioning? Maybe. Or maybe a reduction of the impact of social influencers of health and education? Perhaps. When food insecurity goes down, attendance might go up. We have to remember these things. Love this quote. I think some teams live and die by this quote. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're sitting on the PBIS team and a problem is brought to your attention, It is probably because we are not reinforcing that student. It is probably because we are not providing explicit behavioral instruction. But I don't know that that is always the right approach. We have to consider all the different ways in which the function of that behavior could manifest. We can't assume we know the full scope of the student's needs if we haven't investigated beyond the initial report or referral. Classic example, elementary level student referred for behavioral concerns. What do we immediately do? Behavior plan, token economy, point system. We're looking to reinforce those good behaviors. Guess what happens when you try to reinforce or punish a student with lagging skill? Nothing. Doesn't work. What happens if the underlying problem is actually a psychosocial need? We have to look at the function of the behavior. Underlying social emotional need could be the thing driving that behavior. And that behavior point system is addressing the symptom, but not the underlying cause. So it's about comprehensive assessment leading to intervention, as opposed to assuming that what we see is what the actual need is. Really important concept. Does that make sense to people? Give me a thumbs up. Cool. This is just a quick hit look at a piece of a data integration table that I put together to be able to understand the common elements between our tiered systems of support. You've got things on here like, yeah, there's still behavior point systems in play when appropriate. We've got suicide risk assessments, we've got screening and progress monitoring data. We've got stuff that's cross-cutting, like this CSSC self-reflection walkthrough tool that's looking at tier 1 practices. So yeah, that's gonna cut across both of these. Great, great. But I'm gonna guess that probably a data integration chart like this is a rarity in a district, unfortunately. And it doesn't allow for us to really get a strong sense of where we can capitalize on integration of data systems and do things like comprehensive assessment of student needs. There are lots of forms and uses of data. We've got SEL data, mental health data, behavioral data. Sometimes we're using it to identify kids. Sometimes we're using it to monitor their progress, to understand the impact of our services, to assess the school-wide needs, the aggregate needs of our population, and also identify equity focus areas. Disproportionality is absolutely an area of focus when we talk about data sets. I've talked about this enough, but I guess, you know, Paul and Courtney were calling this like the student workup. I typically call this like initial assessment. Same thing, right? We just want to know all of the things at the outset so that we do the right intervention. We have to gather all the info. We can't move forward based on assumption. I'm going to jump ahead a bit. Here's some other potential data sources. At the end of the day, know that you've got an awful lot of data at your fingertips already, but you might not have access to it, and that's part of the problem. Take a quick look at this list. Who here feels like they have access to most of these data? Madison, you do. That's good. Peggy, Megan, okay. They say no. Kim, yes. So if you're sick, Jamie, you're a no. Okay. If it's a no for anyone, I guess the question becomes, does that impact your ability to effectively understand the needs of your kids and design a plan that will get at the needs of your kids? And it probably does. It's probably going to have an impact. Okay, we're going to close out today talking about universal screening. Universal screening is something we could talk about for 10 hours. We've got 21 minutes. So it's going to be fast. I want to couch this conversation in an understanding that trauma screening is probably not going to be your first foray into screening. But you have to screen for something to build capacity such that you can get to trauma screening. Make sense? Anyone screening right now using that meets this definition, what do you think? Come off mute. Let me know what tool you're using.
I know that at my level, we use the BESS universal screener. It's a teacher rating scale. But I know that we also at the upper levels do have some substance abuse screeners that they do as well. So we do pre-K through, I think 11 with the BESS, or it might be up to 12.
Nice. Well done. Faye's using ADESA at the elementary level. Cool. All right. I'm gonna pitch today an approach to screening that leverages problem-specific measures, because I think at the end of the day, these are tools that are getting at problems that we know exist, but we need to unpack how often and who, and be able to get an actionable data set to identify kids early. Here are the components of screening that are essential to orient to. You do need a team. I'm going to point back to that team that we talked about previously that's so critical. Buy-in from school and community stakeholders. You know, you're going to have an argument in your back pocket for why screening is important for every stakeholder. PD and technical assistance to make sure staff are ready. You're going to need to select a population to screen. You're going to need to pick a screening measure. Any one of these things I have seen be the end of the discussion with screening in a district. But there's a solution for all of these. We'll talk about a lot of them today. Consent procedures, active consent, passive consent. Can I do the thing? I'm going to do the thing. Tell me not to. We have to determine which consent procedures we want to adopt as a district. Plan for day of, data collection, analysis, and warehousing, and the most important piece, coordinate follow-up. Do not screen for the sake of screening just to collect data. You have to respond to these data. You have to use these data in an action-oriented way. It's unethical to do otherwise. I'll give you a little bit of insight into the major components of our screening system in Methuen. It is part of a much, much larger system, okay, that we've built out over many years. We do engage in K-12 screening at this point, and we conduct that multiple times per year. We primarily focus on internalizing concerns. Someone please tell me why. Anybody?
Does it have to do with the overlap between externalizing and internalizing, that most externalizers also have an underlying internalizing? Or do you focus on it because the internalizers are usually invisible?
The latter, Colleen.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that though. I like that first perspective too. We're terrible as a field at finding kids with internalizing concerns. We had a 63% increase in the number of students who were eligible for services following screening for internalizing concerns. Why? Because we can't find anxiety and depression and trauma are really hard to see. Guess what's not hard to see? Kids flipping desks. That's real obvious. So when we're screening, we're looking for internalizing issues because it's hard to see. It's hard to identify. We do rely on self-report in Methuen. Because we're using a problem-specific measure that focuses on affect, it would be bad science for me to implement a tool that isn't a self-report tool. There's no better way of collecting data on affect than asking someone how they feel. And I worry about teacher rating scales that dip their toes into affect. And I see a lot of good ones out there that don't do that, and they're looking for things like here's a good example. On the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, there's a question that asks like, does the student steal things? That's pretty black and white. You either know that or you don't. It either happened or it didn't. But when we say, does the student appear to be depressed? Oh, I don't know about that question. That's feeling all kinds of strange there. That's not the kind of question that I think we can hang our reliable valid hat on. So just be aware that there are plenty of uses for teacher rating scales, but rating scales that point at affect, I think not. Passive consent with opt-out procedures is what we have ultimately engaged in. Why? Because screening is important, and just as important as all the other things that we use passive consent for, like vision and hearing and dental screening. Why would we treat mental health with less importance? It's also allowing for us to do this in a really efficient way. What's the percentage of families that opted out of screening? What do you think? Take a guess. No wrong answer here. Jane, 0%, ridiculous. Christine, 5%. Anyone else? Jamie, go for it. Yeah.
I was thinking 5% too.
5%. Kate's at 10. All you 0% people, I can't stand you because you're right. Jane, Lauren, it's actually less than 1%. Less than 1%. Parents aren't opting out of this stuff. That holds true for the expert numbers across the state as well. Less than 1% opted out. It's tapping into a beautiful phenomenon whereby if you have to do one more thing to opt out, you tend not to do that, and I'm fine with that. So it's a situation that allows for us to move on screening in a really efficient way. We do use web-based tools, Google Forms typically. This is the part of the conversation where people are like, wow, really inappropriate, John. Can't believe you're using Google. And then I ask them where they house all their IEPs, and the conversation goes quiet. We're a Google Enterprise district. The data sits on our servers. If you're a Google district, you're good. Data secured, it's private. And we follow up with students in the moderate to severe range on these measures. Anyone that indicates suicidal ideation or self-harm receives immediate follow-up. And who is doing the screening? That's the most important, or that's a really important piece to highlight. Our school counselors, adjustment counselors, social workers, and school psychs. They can do this work, 100%. Why do we screen? What's the purpose? Well, early identification, for sure. That's the goal. We are the prevention arm of the mental health system writ large. We need to own that. I've said that a few times over the course of this series. We don't have to wait for diagnosis and crisis. We can actually look for emerging concerns. And we are one of the only institutions that are uniquely positioned to get to youth populations in a way that can allow for universal screening to take place. The onus is on us to do this. It reduces crisis. It fosters preventative care. I shared that data point before. We don't have to go over that. And these data can and should be used as a weapon with stakeholders. You've got to tell them what the aggregate rates are and ask for more help. This is going to address some of the questions around the screening, the selection of measure. These are all free, lots of free measures in the SHAPE system. I'm not going to demo it, but if we were, it would ultimately be the case that you can get to measures very quickly, and a lot of them are free.
John, does the SHAPE framework, is that generating those Google Forms for you?
It is not, but I'll share a set of resources with you. We have created them, so happy to pass those along to cut that work out for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no worries, no worries. I talked about why we use a problem-specific measure. I also want to share, like, there are a lot of measures out there that say they're global measures, and they point to this set of students is at risk, to which I have to say, well, at risk for what? I've got to administer another battery of tests anyway, now that you've pointed at a group of students. So I'm seeking to cut out the middleman with problem-specific measures. No problem, Colleen. You do you. I'll see you soon. Happy April break. I see it like this. I could throw darts at a map of Massachusetts and be certain that anxiety, depression, and trauma are problems in the district that I hit, right? We know what the problems our kids face are relative to internalizing problems. So why do we use a multi-gated approach to getting at the kids that need help? What I ultimately do is I cluster together the GAD-7, PHQ-9, and UCLA brief trauma screen, and that's a comprehensive assessment for internalizing concerns, or a pretty good one, that allows for us to cut through the noise of at risk and get to problem-specific, actionable, and also informing intervention. Make sense? Okay. Here are a couple good measures. How many people in here can add 7 numbers together? Oh, only 2 of you. That's unfortunate. Madison and Kim. Great. Well, for the rest of you, you can tap into the free tools that I'm going to share that add them together for you. This is another good one. I can't wait till we can remove the COVID-19 life event checklist and replace it with something a little more general. Quick note on trauma screening. Please know that trauma screening is useless if you're only looking at the life event checklist. You need to look at the impact score as well. Why is that? Or I did that in reverse. But just looking at, for example, the ACEs that an individual has accrued over the course of their life does not allow for you to understand whether or not that is resulting in post-traumatic stress. You have to ask about impact, which is why I tell people, please don't administer the ACE screener to a kid. It's literally for adults. It's not for kids. It's supposed to be administered post 18th birthday. Also, it tells you nothing about their experience with those ACEs. It's a phenomenal study. Love it. It was groundbreaking in helping us to understand the prevalence of potential trauma events, but it is not a screener. This is how we would recommend approaching screening when we're talking about starting small. 1 student, 1 measure, 1 day. This is going to allow for you to learn an awful lot about screening in a very short period of time. When you screen 1 kid, you learn about selection of measure, how to administer and score that measure. You learn about consent procedures, where you're going to warehouse that data. You learn about how to interpret the scores. It helps you to understand how you're going to use those data in your practice. And you learn all that with just 1 kid. So you don't have to screen 1,000 kids to get some really valuable data on screening. I just said a lot of this. This is what it ultimately looked like when we were scaling up our screening. We went from active consent with 1 kid, and then imagine like class level or grade level, passive consent and opt-out was necessary. We were monitoring our implementation as we scaled up and recognized that we had to shift our practice. Yeah, paper and pencil with 1 kid, no big deal, but web-based for sure for a larger group of students. And then I do think it's fair to say, like, administration by school mental health staff to begin with, but then leverage the whole staff, have them point at the link for the measure, read the opt-out message, and you're waiting in the wings to ultimately respond to those data. This was actually our first large-scale tested change. We had about 22% of our students screen the moderate to severe range for anxiety, about the same for depression. Here's what we screen for in Methuen now, many years later. Lots of different measures for lots of different problem areas, produces a really rich data set. And it begs the question like, well, why would we screen so early, so often for so many different things? And to that, I will ask you a question. According to the National Institute for Mental Health, how long does it take on average for students to get care after they experience symptoms of a mental health concern? So you start to experience a mental health concern. How long does it take on average to get care? Christine's laughing. She's ridiculous. For those of you that already know the answer to this question, please do not participate. But what do we think? How long on average? This is where you have to like participate with stuff. 2 years, says Jane. Thank you, Jane. Appreciate that. 12 to 18 months, Danielle. Thank you. 3 to 6 months, Christine. You're ridiculous, Christine. You already know the answer. Anybody else? 1 year to 18 months, Faye. Friends, 8 to 10 years is the national average wait time to receive services after you start to experience a mental health problem. That's it. That's ball game. I could walk away now. I should. Why? Because we don't look for these things. We don't look for these things. We wait for two things: diagnosis, crisis. We have to look for emerging concerns. Screening is requisite to do that. There we go. If I could drop my mic now, I would. All right, all kinds of data. This is what I want to show you. This is what happens when you can actually get to a point where you can screen large populations over time. This is our 7-year anxiety screening comparison data graph. So we saw pre-pandemic an 8.5% decrease in student scoring in the moderate to severe range for anxiety, and an 11.5% increase in no concern for anxiety. I'll take that data all day long. That runs counter to national data, period. It's not supposed to happen. But why did it happen? Well, you look for problems early, you provide early care. It's as simple as that. You can see what happened after the pandemic, but we are on the right trajectory because we're doubling down on the things that worked before the pandemic. Same kind of trend for depression, same kind of trend for post-traumatic stress, although we only started screening for that last year. These are the two resources that include all those measures, friends, that you're looking for. It's going to be in the resource guide, okay? So definitely check that stuff out. Jamie, take care. Happy April break. I'm not going to live demo screening today. I want to get you out of here. Next session, Thursday, 5/5, 3 to 4:30. We're going to talk about supporting educators in establishing a trauma-informed healing centered school culture. I'll stick around for the next 2 minutes. I've got another session at 4, but I will answer any questions. Thank you for being here today. I recognize this was a little earlier, but you all made it. And I hope you have a lovely April break. I really enjoyed chatting with all of you.
John, this is Kate. I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So when you're doing these screeners, like I said, I'm new to the profession. I'm 5 years in, but I've always heard that a challenge with the screeners is that when you give out the screener, particularly with middle school, high school, if like as the social work team or the school adjustment counselors, if you give out these large screeners and then you get high levels of suicidality, you have to check in with each of those students who had written that they have suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation or those types of things. How do you manage that if you're doing these screeners?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is you really have to adopt an approach where you're scaling up safely. Start with one kid, you can manage that, no problem.
Yeah.
Scale it up to 5 to 10. Okay, that's still feeling safe. Maybe screen a class. You know, now you're getting a little bit bigger. You're starting to understand the aggregate needs of kids. I would say screen until it's not comfortable anymore, and then stop and reflect on what you now need, which is more people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so it seems like if you were to the point where you would be screening a whole school, the whole team would be ready for that. It would be a 3-week event, or that's just a made up number, where the team's available to do that follow-up.
That's right. That's right. So it's still universal screening if you break it up into chunks. And it's also the case that you don't get the universal screening overnight, because typically it's
Yeah.
not the case that you've got a team that can, operate at that capacity.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate you being here. All right, friends, I gotta bug out. It was so good to see you. Ellie, I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, John.
Take care.
Take care.